Okay. Okay, hello everyone. It is my pleasure to welcome you back to the sixth and unfortunately the last session of this very inspiring conference. And we will hear 6 more presentations about vessel function and social relations. And first presentation is by Daniel Albero Santa Cruz, Manuel Calvo Trias, David Javaloyas Molina, and Jaume Garcia Rosello. And the paper is titled Entangled Ceramics, Pottery Spaces and the Construction of Gender in Contemporary Rural Communities from Northern Ghana. And I would ask our colleague Daniel to join us with his video and share, please, if you can share your screen and we can start with the presentation.
Good evening. Can you see me and hear me, please? Is everything working properly?
I cannot hear you. I don't know if
you can hear me.
Others could hear you.
Yes, but can you see me?
Okay, now yes.
Okay, nice. That's great.
Can see you.
So hi to everyone. It's a pleasure to find here in these strange days some colleagues like Dasna and Jonah, Claire, and Michelle. It's a very pleasure for me to see you again here and to see that everyone it's all right. So I'm going to share my presentation and I hope it's going to work properly. Can you see the PowerPoint? Yes?
Yes, it's
okay. Great. So in this talk, I will address diverse phenomena related to the use of ceramics in domestic spaces, but from a different perspective. In this case, I would like to see how the spatial distribution and the use of the vessels is related to the construction of gender identity. To address this topic, sorry, I don't know what's going on with my laptop. ¿Qué pasa? Let me see. I don't know why my slides are not running, but wait for a moment. I'm going to see. Okay, thank you. I will try to solve this problem as soon as possible. I'm going to try again.
Okay, take your time. It's not a problem.
Oh, why not? It's going. Okay, now I think it's working. So I will address this topic of gender construction through an archaeological case study located in West Africa in northern Ghana, very close to the borders with Togo and Burkina Faso. This is a multi-ethnic region in which different ethnic groups with different cultural and linguistic characteristics live side by side, and where my research group, ArchaeoWeave, has been developing several projects since 2009 with the aim of investigating the relationships between social strategies and material culture. Up to now, we have addressed topics such as ethnic identity, learning processes, knowledge transfer, social relationships and technology, and the issue that we will address in this presentation, that is the construction of gender. All of these topics have been approached by means of the study of domestic spaces, pottery, and oral traditions, among other research lines. In the case of ceramics, we have focused on the study of the social phenomena related to the production, distribution, use, and consumption of pottery. The last 2 topics are the ones that I'm going to address in this presentation. Regarding pottery, it's important to highlight that in our study area, women related to the Komba and Kusasi ethnic groups are the ones in charge of pottery production, while the other ethnic groups are the ones who consume the pottery from these ethnic groups. We've studied all the vessels present in 20 domestic units associated with 5 different ethnic groups: Bimoba, Komba, Mamprusi, Fulani, and Kusasi, thus comprising 82 people who own and use ceramics, 60 women and 22 men. We recorded the typology, the function, the current use and reuses, the age, the ownership, spatial location, and state of conservation of each ceramic, even shards, located in every domestic unit in order to carry out a quantitative and qualitative analysis with this record. Through semi-structured interviews and active observation, we have been able to record this data in 875 ceramics and to create a database with which to address the many relationships existing between ceramics, domestic context, and the processes of use. However, I'm going to mainly address in this talk the relationship between pottery consumption and the construction of gender. Okay, so the analysis carried out showed that most of the pottery located in the domestic units, 81%, belong to women, something that is not surprising since these are polygamous societies. This means that the number of women living in each domestic compound is significantly higher compared to men. It is quite common to find several landlords' wives living together in the same house, and even to find there the landlord's mother and the wives of some of the landlord's sons as well. Anyway, we can see how the average number of ceramics that belong to women virtually doubles the number of pots owned by men. There are some cases in which a single woman can own up to 33 pots, a significant higher amount of vessels compared to the few 7 pots usually owned by men. In this sense, we can state that the ceramics are produced by Komba and Kusasi women, but they are also mainly used by women, whatever their ethnic group. In addition, we see that men and women use the ceramics in a different way in their daily life, as well as in different spaces of the house. Ceramics related to women are mainly located inside their rooms and, to a lesser extent, in the external areas adjacent to them, while pottery owned by men predominate in public and highly visible areas of the house. This fact is related to the spaces of life and domain related to each gender. Most of the ceramics that belong to women are concentrated in the back areas of the domestic compounds, where each woman has her own hut and an outside area for her own use. Inside the huts, as you can see at the bottom of the slide, in the photo, the women usually have a large shed of storage pots when they store the grain that they use to feed themselves and also their children. And also they have inside the hut a kitchen that you can see at the upper part of the slide. Outside the hut, women usually have several large ceramics to store water. You can see a photo of them at the bottom of the slide. And also an outdoor kitchen where they used to prepare the food. In addition to having some vessels in their daily living spaces, large part of the pottery related to men is located in the public areas of the domestic context, such as the entrance of the compounds and the front yard, when the men usually spend most of their time. We also observe gender differences when it comes to the way ceramics are used among these people. Ceramics related to women have many different and creative uses and reuses, being used, for instance, and occasionally to transport fire, as a stool, as a mold to make ceramics, to transport water as a urinal, toy for children, among many other uses. However, pottery is mainly associated with the daily activities that women carry out in the spaces mentioned before, to store grain and other products such as flour, storing water, cooking and serving food, feeding the animals. In the case of men, We also observe many reuses and occasional uses, for instance, to transport fire, transport coal and nuts, to protect, for instance, a palm tree, to bath themselves, to store liquids and solids, among many other functions and uses. However, men mainly use the same types of ceramics that women consume in daily activities to make shrines aimed for the ancestors, to feed their animals, but also to prepare medicinal herbs. Unlike women, men use their ceramics on a more occasional basis, mainly on a ritual and symbolic activities linked to their animistic religion that are carried out in places of the dwelling with high public visibility. The ceramics that men use to create their shrines or to prepare medicinal herbs are the oldest of the ceramic assemblage under study, having in most cases more than 20 years old. In contrast, the same small types of vessels used by women in certain daily activities, such as cooking or serving food, hardly last more than 5 years. This shows that there is a strong relationship between the social value of the ceramics, their use linked to certain ritual phenomena, and their durability and visibility. In this sense, the oldest ceramics related to women are also the ones that have the greatest social and economic value. We refer in this case to the large storage pots that every woman has in her hut and are used to store grain. These vessels are usually more than 10 years old and in many cases more than 20. These kinds of pots, here you can see a photo of these storage pots. These kinds of pots are the most expensive within the women ceramic assemblages and are associated with the dowry that every woman receives from their parents when she is married and moves to her husband's house. Therefore, these kinds of vessels play a key social role, becoming a symbol of the woman's origin and their life history. Therefore, our case study confirms that women greatly construct their gender identity through the practices they carry out and the materiality involved in these practices and in certain engendered spaces. In this way, they establish a clear link between them and the ceramics in their daily life. This relationship is clearly and symbolically reflected also in their burials. Women graves are labeled with using a ceramic, as you can see here in the upper photographs, while men graves are marked by a stone. You can see two of these photos of men graves at the bottom. In this way, pottery is certainly involved in the women life cycle here. When a woman gets married, as we have seen before, receives a ceramic assemblage from her parents. But when she dies, she receives a pot too from her closer relatives. So the existence of different ways of using pottery, depending on the gender identity, is also clearly evident in the age of the vessels, used by men and by women. Most of the women ceramics are less than 10 years old, something that is related to their constant renewal due to practical use and their daily life. However, we see that men own most of the oldest ceramics recorded. As we have seen, this difference is clearly linked to the relationship that men establish with pottery in the development of certain ritual practices and the creation of animistic shrines aimed for the ancestors. In this case, we see how men are in charge of the main religious worships of the domestic group, and they actively use ceramics for this purpose, in addition to other practical daily activities. In this sense, in this sense, we can point out that ceramics represent for these men a link with tradition, something that is crucial in the current context of deep change that rural communities from northern Ghana are experiencing due to globalization. In this sense, it's interesting to note that while women have introduced multiple plastic and metal containers that are used together with ceramics in their daily activities, the shrines built by men never incorporate these new and foreign elements. The reason why is that if men introduce plastic or metal objects in the shrines, the spirit of the ancestors wouldn't go there because they are not familiar with these new materials, since neither plastic nor metal containers existed at the time of the ancestors. So we can conclude that the way people use pottery plays a key role in the construction of identity. Even though men and women share the same pottery types, the definition of gender through ceramics is significantly different in each gender, involving different spaces, practices, and meanings. We have seen that women are more connected to pottery than men, since they constantly use their vessels in a wider range of daily activities that take place inside the domestic context, such as cooking, eating, storing grain or water, transport water, bathing the children, and many other activities. In contrast, men usually use most of their, I'm going to check the chat. In contrast, men usually use most of their vessels in a more public and occasional basis, such as the performance of rituals aimed for the ancestors and closely linked to their animistic religion. Men use the vessels to establish a link with tradition. This is the main use they do. There are certain ceramics that have a high social value for both men and women, such as the case of the men shrines and the women dowries. In both cases, the social value given to the pots is related to symbolic aspects, such as their link with the tradition or the woman history, but also is related to certain material aspects, such as their old age, and in the case of the dowries, also the economic value. What we can see here in this case study is the complex factors that participate in the processes of use of the vessels. Gender, domestic spaces, funerary context, daily life, people history, tradition, religion, and many other aspects. This draws a panorama where multiple connections can be established through pottery and the use of pottery in the construction of the social world. And thank you very much for your attention. I hope that this is going to be interesting for you and you enjoy this presentation.
Thank you, Daniel. I think it's like every archaeologist's dream to have established these connections between pottery and social categories such as gender. So yeah, we have time for a question. Okay, Ilya Palaguta asks, what about basket weaving in Ghana? Is it also widespread? Is it connected with pottery production, shapes, function, etc.?
So can you repeat, because I couldn't hear you very well.
What about basket weaving in Ghana?
Okay.
Is it connected with pottery production?
Not so much, because they are two different productions. Basket weaving is a little bit different. I mean, they are made by people from the same community, but they don't have a lot in common. Maybe in the shapes and the types, but they are used for very different things.
Okay, thank you. And Michaela Spataro asks, were you able to get an idea of when these strong identities reflected in the tombs pottery started?
We don't know. It's something very old. We have problems recording or working with these people because their idea of the time, the concept of time is very different from us. Here I try to put to make some categorizations regarding the age of the vessels, for instance, less than 5 years, more than 10 years, but we cannot take these numbers as something absolute, as something very close, because they only have a very a rather vague idea of the concept of time, of the past, of how the time is going towards. So they don't know. They only know that it's something very old, it's from the old times, and that's all. They cannot tell you for how long they have been doing these kind of practices, but it's very old, absolutely, for several generations at least.
Okay, there are a lot of questions that I don't know if we have time for everyone.
Okay.
Yeah, so please tell me if we can stay with this. Okay, the next question is with the using other materials like plastic, etc. Has this impacted the status of women in the community?
Okay, sorry, I think your voice was going out. Can you repeat again? Sorry.
With the introduction of using
Okay.
other materials like plastic, has this impacted the status of women in the community?
Not really. I mean, I think their status is so low and always have been so low, always below the men, you know? So that really doesn't, okay, it had some, the introduction of these materials have some impact because women want to buy these materials, these new containers to cook or to store liquids or everything. And this means that they are not going to buy pots. And pottery provides money for these women, for the potters who are women. So the introduction of these new materials, plastic and metals, is something not good. It's not good in an economic sense. It means that the income for these women is going down, and also maybe the power within the community, no, in the sense. But I mean, they always have been below men, you know, in the old times and the new times. It's quite common. Mm-hmm.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question, and we will leave others for the discussion at the end. Pots connected with graves have a hole. Are they intentionally made? Yes.
Sorry.
Are the holes on pots connected with graves made intentionally?
I don't know. I never asked for that. For the hole, do you mean in the? It's because sometimes they are broken pots, and they just put it there. It's a discarded pot, and they reuse it just to create the grapes. And it's a kind of something that is not going to be used again, only for that woman for that woman that is buried there. But I don't know the reason why they do this hole in this grave. I will check it because I never thought of that before.
Okay, thank you very much for a very interesting presentation. And now I would like to ask our colleague Bianca Gina Kovac to present her presentation called From Rural Hut to Royal Castle, Pottery Usage in Late Medieval Transdanubia, Hungary.
Good evening, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you and we can see you. You can share your screen and start with the presentation.
Can you see my presentation?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. I'm Bianca Kovac from Hungary. I'm in the second year of a PhD program at archaeology. In my PhD thesis, I processed late medieval ceramics from 3 sites in northeastern Transdanubia in Hungary, findings from 2 castles and the market town. In addition to processing of the 3 assemblages and the chronological observations, my primary goal is to separate the locally produced ceramics in the region and to define their market area. So in my work, I fundamentally rely on materials processed by me, as well as previously published finds. Furthermore, I try to view the ceramics of as many sites as possible in person. The different types of the examined sites also allows me to draw conclusions about society. Although in my PhD thesis, I focus mainly on the northeastern part of Transdanubia, it soon became clear that this area needed to be expanded to investigate social aspects, because while the habitations of the upper social strata in the studied area are relatively well researched, but we know little about the lower social layers. Our knowledge about the most of village settlements comes from field survey materials, and those are not eligible to investigate this topic. So to research the lower layers, I had to include the western places from the studied area. In the title, I used the name Transdanubia, which is a bit overstatement, considering I have almost no information about the northwestern and southern part of Transdanubia yet. The vast majority of the materials I have reviewed can be dated to the 15th century and the beginning of the 16th century. So in my presentation, I will talk about this period. Furthermore, it is important to note that my research is not yet complete. In the following, I will summarize the results of so far. Late medieval 15th and early 16th century pottery is not a popular field of research in Hungary, except for soft tiles, of course. Let's face it, this is not surprising since the ceramics of this period were mostly thrown on fast wheel. So to speak, they were made in mass production. So they are relatively uniform. In addition, excavations often reveal huge quantities of these. The last summary on late medieval pottery of Carpathian Basin was made by István Feld in 1987. At that time, based on the available data, he was not yet able to make a sociologically structured overview. Of course, the publications about materials of different sites and some special vessel types often cover social issues as well. For example, Imre Hol also examined the social aspects of imported ceramics. But we don't have a summary study on this topic yet. During my work, I tried to partially fill this gap for a smaller area. As I previously mentioned, I expanded the research area because of the lower classes, but another problem occurs. We don't have much written sources about the people who lived in the villages, so we cannot determine for sure which house belonged to which social layer. Therefore, we can assume based on their materials. But what is the guarantee that those people express their social and financial status by their everyday objects of use? Sorry, this may have been the general, but there are always exceptions. Moreover, the financial status doesn't either always indicate the social status. This way, the differences between the different lower classes, such as the peasants and petty nobles, cannot be really separated. In contrast, the research of the higher classes much more easier, since we exactly know the owners of the castles, the manor houses, and even also often urban houses, and we also know their social and economic status. Due to these facts, I have a better look at the upper classes and more general look at the lower. A special type of late medieval pottery, the stoves, show the differences between the households of different social classes quite well. The question is whether we can also observe a similar phenomenon with the ceramic vessels or not. To find out the possible differences, I researched three aspects of the ceramics. These are the following, but you can see on the slide. First, I examined the quantity and size of the vessels. By quality, I mean their visible quality and the place of producing, namely whether they were produced locally or they were made in further parts of the country or they were imported wares. In the following, I will review the vessel types by function, starting with the most common type of vessels in the excavations, the pot. We don't know exactly the real amount of the pots that was used at the same time, because on the one hand, the excavations usually do not uncover the whole living area, so we usually don't find all of the ever used vessels. On the other hand, the total number of pots doesn't give us a good picture of the real amount of the pots that was used at the same time, because the shapes didn't change as fast and often as they might needed a new vessel. The pots could wear out very quickly. For example, we know according to written sources that 17 pots were bought for the kitchen of the Archbishop's Castle in Esztergom in 1489. Possibly the situation had been similar in other years and in other castles too. However, this number is suitable for observing larger differences of magnitude between individual households. Based on this, as expected, in castles, more pots were used at the same time than in a simple rural or urban household. The next question is, can we observe size differences in similar way? Did they use bigger pots in castles? The problem with this is that most of the finds found are very fragmentary, and the rim diameter of the pots is usually not enough to decide their former capacity. Nevertheless, most often we can only estimate from this number. The situation would be simple if we could find pots only with smaller diameter in the expectedly smaller rural and urban households, and only with larger diameter in the castles and monasteries. Of course, the picture is not so clear, but it seems that in the latter places they had more larger than smaller pots. This especially can be observed of the so-called Austrian graphite pots, because I know they are particularly large pieces only from castles. Moreover, these vessels lead us to the question of quality and place of producing. It is clear from the data that both the castles and the other households were usually supplied with cooking ceramics mainly from their surrounding area. However, it's not true for those areas where fireproof clay was not available. The sites of these areas were supplied by further pottery workshops. Although most of the pots in the castles are of good quality, there are also lower quality local goods among them. The picture is the same in the regular households too. Thus, no substantial difference can really be observed between households in the upper and lower layers. If you think about it, this is not surprising, since cooking in royal and noble castles was the job of the chefs, who usually belong to the lower layers. For kitchen ceramic, the functionality was primal. In tableware, the representative role was also important. Nonetheless, the situation with the jugs is similar as with the pots, namely the products of the potters in the area were mainly used in each household. Goods from further areas are rare. The pieces found are usually very fragmented, but it seems all sizes of these vessels were used by each household. Only the large graphite jugs from Austria are the ones I know only from castles. Differences between social layers are best observed in cups and bowls. The locally made simple samples can be found in every household regardless of social affiliation. In contrast, high-quality ornamented cups and bowls can only be observed in richer village houses and in residence of the upper layers. It is interesting that in some places, weaker imitations of these decorated cups and bowls also appear in poorer village households. In the second half of the 15th century, the cups imported from Austria and Loschitz can also be attached to the upper and richer layers. The Loschitz cups were especially popular among the feudal nobility. This type proves well that the customs of the royal court became more and more widespread among the nobility during the century. Only to the members of the top layer were available the Siegburg cups, which were popular in the first half of the 15th century. Dreihausen cups were much rarer, thus were only present in a few noble and ecclesiastical households outside the royal court. And the Spanish majolica and Middle Eastern pottery occurred exclusively in the royal court of Buda. The vessels with the function listed so far are all common. As we have seen, they occur in all sites in different quantities and qualities. In the following, I will cover some rarer vessels with special function. First of all, I would like to mention the issue of three-leg pans, which was very rare between the examined materials. Representatives of this type of vessels had already arrived in the country in the 13th, 14th century, and from the 15th century it was also made in the urban pottery workshops of the country, at least in Buda for sure. However, it seems rural potters have started producing that much later. So far, I have found only 1 or 2 pieces in the materials of the castles and monasteries, except for the Buda, of course. In the case of northeastern Trans-Danubian sites, it is clear that these are not locally made pieces, but made in Buda. The three-leg pans were used to toast and roast the food. It seems that the representatives of the upper strata like the food prepared in this way. Therefore, their employees also acquired this type of pottery for their kitchen. Also worth mentioning the jugs with a handle on their top. So far, I have found a total of 4 such vessels in the materials, 1 in a village, 1 in a market town, and 2 in our urban setting. Based on ethnographic and Western European publications, this type of vessels had been used to carry food. Thus, it is particularly interesting that so far it has only come from an environment where the owners may have needed a food carrier vessel to their work on their fields or vineyards. However, this requires further investigation. As to my knowledge, this type of vessel is also common in castles in German areas. Finally, the proportion of glazed ceramics was still very low at this time, except in the Buda area. It was not until the end of the century that this technology began to spread among rural potters. Thus, glazed ceramics, like other types of vessels coming from further areas, appear only in the materials of the upper layers and richer rural households, and small numbers even there. In summary, I have shown only a few examples, but the data so far as a whole suggests that the vessels quality which were used in the kitchens of the nobility was the same as among the lower layers. The observed quantity and size differences can be explained by the size of the households. Social differences can be well detected in the case of tableware, especially cups, or in the case of goods from further areas, which appeared only in richer households. Furthermore, newer types of ceramics, such as the three-leg pans or glazed ceramics, look like to only be owned by the nobility and richer layers in this time. I hope during my work I will find further differences too, and thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you, Bianca. It was really interesting to see these connections between these fine bowls and cups and their presence in higher status castles and not in rural communities. I think we don't have any questions in the... No. Yeah, very interesting, but no questions for you. Maybe there will be questions later on in the discussion. Thank you very much, Bianca, again. And now I would like to ask our colleague Gergana Gionova to present her research on daily life in Sofia from 17th to 18th century through the ceramics. Yeah, Gergana, can you see? We can see you and we can hear you. You can share your screen.
Okay. You can see.
it's still working.
Okay. Thank you for this special organization. I'm happy to participate and to hear all this presentation. Thank you very much. To present some aspect of daily life in Sofia through ceramic paint. I'm going to talk here about the locally produced ceramics, the most common. I have tried to complement the observation with archives and iconography. The textual sources are inventory of Naitori and 100 translated example for Sofia from the 18th and the first half of 19th century. The illustrations are paintings and photographs from the late 19th and early 20th century. Okay, sorry. The archaeological material was found at the Roman amphitheater site in Sofia in the center of the Ottoman city. It belongs to 20 Ottoman pits. The dating is based on the presence of coins and important objects and spans between the 16th and 19th century. Choose a small correction of the title. First, I'm going to talk about ceramics related to the food preparation. The preparation of the bread has left very small traces present in all chronological contexts. We have a lot of ethnological study of this object. They are usually closed by metal or pottery covers. These objects are an essential part of the traditional home, but they are never cited on the Naitori documents. They may be a part of the fireplace. Same painters of the last of 19th century testify to the presence of bakery and bread cellar in the city. The cooking pots are a main form for boiled cooking of meals. At the 16th century, the pots are small, rarely exceed 2 liters. The interior is covered with glaze. The slip is absent except for the very small forms placed inside or outside under the green glaze. Curiously, they also have traces of fire. The closing of all these forms could not have been a rule, since the refractory lids are rare in the context. During the 17th century, green glaze on slip becomes sometimes purely decorative, and it's placed only on the rim. Other pieces continue to be glazed on the inside, but there is an evolution of the sizes. Smaller pots have capacity about 2 liters, and the average capacity appear to be 5, 6, sometimes exceeding 9 liters. The context of the 18th century are less rich, but however, culinary pots seems to rarefy. In the 19th century, the forms are less standardized. In the same time, more than half of the Naitori documents list copper or metal containers. The ceramic vessels are listed only as product containers. The iconography of the early 20th century shows rare examples of pots sold on the market. Another way to cook on the fire was practiced in dishes placed in the oven. These forms are permanent from the end of the 16th century. The oldest have cylindrical profiles and internal glaze. From the 17th century, forms seems to be rather tronconical, some with 2 vertical handles. The glaze for these vessels is not systematic, but can cover only the rims. 19th century cookery books give a lot of recipes for using these dishes. They use a lot of fat, and the food is fried in the oven. Naitori inventory from the 18th century often mention dishes sometimes made of metal or copper, never of ceramic. In the 18th century, this form was not more specified, but many copper containers are listed. However, the tronconico shapes are shown on all present market presentation on the early 20th century. In the same period, the colander also appear as the constant cooking utensil. They are made from the same refractory clay and always glazed in the inside, but not show traces of fire. About the table serving, given the archaeological remains, the cups and bowls of local production predominated at the table. Their shape is more standardized in 16th century. At the late 16th, the annular bases on the left are getting longer. The profiles are often hemispherical. The glaze, still preferably green, cover the whole pieces. Flatter shapes also appear here. In the 17th century, the diversification of forms is confirmed with angular profiles and deeper dishes. In the following century, this tendency is amplified by very different profiles, and their rims are often festooned, hatched, or printed. The body can also be punctured by depressions. Glaze are yellow or green, and during the 19th century, partial glazes employ different uses. The polychromies are obtained by green glazes stained on yellow or by mixed glaze, slips. Sorry. In nitre inventories, the earthenware table serving is not listed. The rare mentions of plates imply a particular material or origin. However, the bowls are on sale at many on the early 20th century market illustrations. The shape for the serving and the consumption of liquid are proportionally fewer. This fact supposes the often use of metal and glass vessels. We must add to this the frequent use of the bowls for drinking. The pictures from 16th century have varying profiles. They are usually glazed on the slip only from the outside. The smaller ones had clearly individual use. The forms with a tubular spout appear until the end of the 16th century. From 17th century and the 19th, mastery drips of slips add to decorative effect, and their body are animated by depressions or flattening. In the 19th century, shapes and decors are diversifying, and it is difficult to identify homogeneous series for liquid serving forms. Some specific uses multiply the forms. Larger forms are used for the storage and heating of water. From the 16th century, large pitchers were provided or not with spout. In the 17th century, similar vases had a bigger capacity. The glaze is placed only on the rim and the tip of the spout when it exists. The Iberic regularly show traces of fire. A large series of basket handle pots are of the same period. Elsewhere in Bulgaria, they are used for cooking and transport of food or milk preparation. In Sofia materials, they are concentrated in the well, and the absence of fire traces let imagine their use for transporting water. In the 19th century, water forms are rare. Ethnographic study and archives provide information about copper and wood containers and water skin. We should say that except in the southern Bulgaria, water conservation was short. It was drawn at least daily in fountains, rivers, and well, many of the rich groundwater of Sofia. Painting is a good illustration of this daily life. In addition to metal or wooden vessels, the iconography largely shows the place of earthenware vessels. Still at the beginning of the 20th century, they had various uses and an important place in the production commercialized in Sofia. In Sofia, the jars are present in all contexts from the 16th to 19th century. They contained mostly canned fruits or vegetables, often for the winter. The sources show a multitude of other containers for food preservation, wood, animal skin, clothes, and glass. Their frequent commercialization up to the 20th century was linked to recipes for preserving foodstuff before the arrival of refrigerators. If the hygienic function of ibrick is not to exclude, the function of the cylindrical pots is more obvious. They are common in the 16th century and glassed inside. It is certain that this hygienic form, is much rarer in the Ottoman period Balkans than it is for contemporary archaeological contexts for the Western world. It is difficult to document through archives or iconography. The few earthenware lighting elements belong to candlestick and come from the late context. Candlesticks are often listed in notary inventories, but they are probably metal objects which are specified for some of them. Pottery lamps seems to be very rare. They are absent from Sofia material. The evolution of Sofia's tooth tiles is already known. They are present in archaeological materials since the end to the 16th century. Sorry, I have a problem. Sorry.
Don't worry, take your time to find.
Okay. More curious are the fragments of braseros from 18th, 19th century context. They have the shape of big dishes with large rims, often incised or festooned. Mainly unglazed, these shards have irregular traces of blackening by fire. The identification of braseros is presumed by comparisons. They are listed in the inventory, some of them in copper. Flower pots are usually second life vessels. This practice, nearly constant for archaeological ceramics from Sofia, is supplanted by the production of specific shapes in 17th century. The examples are without glaze, but with digiti decorations. More recent examples are not found, but the iconography shows the frequent sale of this form, all glazed. The material presented illustrates some aspect of daily life in Sofia. Others are probably not yet interpreted, and I'm looking for idea for this example. and many other everyday needs are provided by a variety of materials. Here you can see just a few examples from the trade. And thank you very much for the attention.
Thank you, Girgana, for your interesting presentation. I will see if there are any questions for you in the chat. Not yet. We still have a few minutes, so.
Okay.
No, I don't see any questions here. Agnes says, thank you, Girgana. Your paper has shed light to a lot of questions about this type of pottery. And Ellen also says, thank you. Okay, if there are no questions, maybe it will be at the final closing remarks and discussion. So now I would like to ask our colleague Raina Šošić-Klinčić to introduce our next speaker.
Thank you, Olga. Hello, everyone. I will use this opportunity to shortly say congratulations to the organizers for this great conference and great presentations. I learned a lot. And we can now move on with the next presentation by Pamela Armstrong, Rick Vorman, and Alexandra Ricci, how a proposed new typology of Constantinopolitan white wares based on recent excavations at the monastery of Satirost might reflect changing dining habits. So please.
Hello, can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, yes, we can hear you.
I'm sorry, I had mute on. I've just unmuted, sorry.
Yeah, it's okay, we can hear you.
Okay, I'll go back and I'll start again. Thank you very much indeed for organizing this wonderful conference, and I'm so happy to be able to take part in it. Unfortunately, our talk today isn't exactly as we had intended because COVID-19 interrupted our study plans. However, most of what we wanted to say can be presented. Our paper is focused on a 9th century monastic foundation on the coast of Bithynia, once the Asian hinterland of Constantinople, and a rural setting. But today, and this is the monastery here, and in the 9th century, it was extremely rural. But today, it's a crowded suburb of Greater Istanbul, as you can see here. And the site is an island in a sea of apartment blocks. When broached in 1995, when this photograph was taken, which was published in a newspaper, the site consisted of a man-made platform with buttressed retailing walls that formed the perimeter. The surface of the platform was level with the floor above a subterranean monumental cistern. Above the section of the cistern that had retained its roof, so this is the cistern, an underground cistern which is exposed, but it continues right back here. And this is the roofed part, which it still exists. And on that, the roof that exists is a section of a church. The whole area was covered in topsoil, accumulated since the abandonment of the medieval site. And in 1995, fieldwork was undertaken in the form of a survey of the standing remains and continued for 3 years from 2001, which produced scientific plans like these that developed our understanding of what was there. And since then, 8 excavation seasons have taken place between 2008 and 2018. It's documented in a number of texts that the Patriarch of Constantinople, Ignatius, built a church dedicated to the Archangel Michael on the mainland opposite the Prince's Islands in the 6th year of the reign of the Emperor Basil I, that is 873 to 4. It was a very fine church at the center of a monastery. And it's recorded that when Ignatius died, he was interred in his monastery in October 877. Now, I'm going to show you a little section which is in this area here. And here, this is what we're dealing with. In the course of the excavation, a constructed tomb was found to the north of the east exterior of the church. And this is what the grave actually looked like up close, and it's not an ordinary grave. And the constructed tomb is extremely significant for the identification of the church as the Catholicon of the Satyros monastery, because of a visual rendering of the monastery of Satyros here, dated to the end of the 10th century, just over 100 years after the Patriarch had been interred there. In it, the architectural background is prominent, with the left of the composition dominated by a circular building with a dome resting on a windowed drum and a smaller structure adjoining it. Other buildings include a long arcaded structure with the elongated body of the Patriarch reclining in front, and a rectangular court whose short end is marked by a tall building. The newly ascertained, that's from the excavations, monumental size of the church's dome, the physical layout of what appears to be an arcaded court or portico, the presence of one, if not 2, taller tower-like buildings, and the existence of a court are elements both identified archaeologically and in this beautifully executed miniature. It's known that the site still functioned as a monastery in the 12th century, when it was recorded as a metochion of the imperial Pantocrator monastery in Constantinople. Coin evidence tells us the Satyros monastery was still functioning in the 14th century, after which the site seems to have been abandoned. And we go back to this picture. In 1988, a mosque, which you can see to the left here, was built on the edge of the site, whose construction works revealed the southern perimeter wall of the complex along here. Now, in the southeast corner of the platform, excavation carried out in 2010 revealed the presence of a buttressed corner tower, 6.5 meters square, contemporaneous with the construction of the monastery, as it is bonded with the retaining wall that supports the construction of the cistern, the platform above it, and the earth fill. The fill of the tower's interior reached some 6 meters in depth, which you can see here, measured from the preserved top of the tower walls. It contained a lot of debris, including medium and large stones, rubble and gravel, as well as brick and tile fragments, and no evidence for any kind of flooring could be attested. And in relation to its spatial dimensions, the tower fill contained relatively little pottery. However, the pottery that was in it predominantly belongs to the early Byzantine period, that is, predating the foundation of the monastery. And here I've given a selection of material, but of course, this is from the last period. This is from the 14th century, but all the other things are early. And worth noting in this context are some finds from the fill: a coin of Justinian, fragments of 6th to 7th century oil lamps. And although this debris layer yielded the great majority of all the early Byzantine finds in Küçükyalı, it also contains some Middle and late Byzantine ceramic fragments. The early Byzantine ceramics were mostly small sherds, while the latter material tended to be in larger pieces that often joined with others to make almost complete vessels, unlike the early material. The tower area, outside the tower itself, contained a much shallower layer of similar fill containing similar material, and it's thought that this must have been brought from close by, since moving earth is such a labor-intensive activity. Now, early in the study of these ceramics, it became apparent that the assemblage included a considerable range of white-bodied wares, not part of the standard reference work for these wares, the ceramics from the St. Polyeuctus excavations at Saraceni in the city. Although there are a few parallels from Aia Irini, a very few, there's a more complex spectrum of varieties here at Küçükyalı, the Satyros monastery. Their presentation in a comprehensive manner required the establishment of a new typology, independent of the Saraceni typology, disregarding its primary division of the ceramics into glazed and unglazed. A study strategy was worked out whereby a fabric reference system was established against which all the whitewares from Satyros could be referenced without prejudice to form or decoration. And this was achieved through a careful and thorough examination of fabrics of individual vessels. A provisional reference collection of 12 different fabrics was established macroscopically, although one of them accounted for about 70% of the whitewares. And it's thought that these might represent different productions within the city, with the largest probably being made somewhere in the vicinity of the monastery. The 12 types are currently being investigated archaeometrically, and we expect some of them to be combined to form an authoritative reference set. Not all of the fabrics are recognizably white. Some are quite pink or quite grey, but we're satisfied they belong to the canonical category of whitewares. Now today, I'm going to show you some whiteware cooking pots from the excavation, a type of local Constantinopolitan ware that is only featured in the pottery report from the Aia Irini before now. So far, we've identified 5 forms of whiteware cooking pot. And because of the fragmentary nature of the sherds, it is rarely possible even to estimate the size of the vessels. And this is the most common form, and one which we estimate has a diameter of 14 centimeters. It has an extremely glossy olive green glaze on the interior and splashed on the upper exterior. And here are some other examples of a similar form, though very fragmentary. And the point of showing these is that the same form can be both glazed and unglazed. The 2 top pieces, here and here, are completely without glaze, while the bottom 2 show the different types of glazes that existed. And this is the same form from Aia Irini with no glaze and a diameter of 14 centimeters, which was our independent assessment of the size of our glazed version. The division into glazed and unglazed is extremely unhelpful and ultimately meaningless. The single glazed whiteware cooking pot from Aia Irini, which is this one, can be found in the publication together with dishes and bowls, tablewares, because they too are glazed, and all of the inside of this cooking pot has a yellow glaze. And these are the other forms of cooking pot from the Satyros excavations. The top one's clearly designed to support a lid. The others seem quite idiosyncratic. The bottom one has a ledge which was probably used to fold in a covering of bread dough, which would have been cooked with the contents of the pot and eaten with them. The second one from the top, which really is a whiteware, very pink in section, with its wide open aspect, must have been used to reduce sauces or in that kind of manner. And while our jar style of pot, the one with the most examples, which could be either glazed or unglazed, can be found in both the Roman and Middle Byzantine periods, but the other forms are new. Now, unfortunately, the nature of the fills where examples of these cooking pots have been found do not contribute to establishing a chronology for them, as the material goes from the 4th to 14th centuries, although, as said earlier, the majority of the material is early. Similarly, the unstratified finds from Irene have a contentious chronology, as Hayes thought they spanned a period of 250 years. So for the time being, we're not proposing a date for our cooking pots, simply pointing out that they exist. And with the establishment of Byzantine domestic whitewares, unrelated to late Roman redwares, there seems to be both a change in the way the vessels were consumed, which in turn reflects a change in the perception of the identity of the consumers. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much for your interesting presentation. I don't see any questions in the chat. Does anybody have a question maybe for Pamela and her colleagues? Okay, I guess not at the moment, maybe later. So we can move on with the presentations. The next one is by Biljana Đorđević, making and using bread baking pans on the Stara Planina mountain.
Thank you, Raina. Hello, everyone, once again. Today, I don't know why it doesn't want. Oh, it's okay. So, first of all, I would like to explain what bread baking pan is. Sorry. It's a ceramic vessel used for baking bread over an open hearth. It's phenomenon very well known until the mid-20th century in Central and Eastern Balkans, where households within an open hearth have been preserved. The bread baking pans is considered one of the most archaic forms of utilitarian pottery. And also very important is that it's a part of a female activities within the household, as well as baking bread is. So that's why it was interesting for my research of ceramic technologies. And I started an ethno-archaeological research with this topic, and it's published. The last article is, you can see here, where you can find it below the photo. The bread baking pans are recognized in their archaeological sites, especially settlements in the Central Balkans from Neolithic period to Middle Ages. We had the opportunity yesterday to see one in the northern Greece in the presentation of Duška Urankocu. And today we saw something from the 19th century in Sofia in the presentation of Gergana Gionova. And you will see that from the 19th century Sofia is practically the same that we can find here. Bread baking pans are not standardized and not uniform. Their dimensions depend on the necessity of the family and, of course, of the skills of the woman who is making them. So they are practically all unique, and they used to say that every home has its own customs, not to speak of a village. But it's not also connected with the making of bread baking pans, but of baking bread in them, and you will see that later. So the procedure, the technological process and the techniques are of making bread baking pans is very simple. There is a such thing in ceramic technology, and I think that there is nothing simple in ceramic technology. In ethnographic literature, it's very well explained textually, but very poor in visual evidence. So I had to find somebody to draw me what I could read in the literature, and those are very good drawing. But I liked to see it in person. In my ethnoarchaeological research about the bread baking pans making in Stara Planina mountain, we visited 36 villages and talked to more than 90 persons. But only in the village Gostusha, we find some women who wanted to show us how they used to make them. And that's why I call this reconstruction and ethnoarchaeological experiment, because they used to make them some 30, 40 years ago, but the making of the bread baking pans is abandoned now. But some examples of bread baking pans still exist, and from time to time they use them. As you can see, all the steps of the making bread baking pans are the same as all the steps of any other ceramic vessel, except the last one, because as far as I know, this is the only ceramics that is not fired before using, which means that the first use is also the firing of the vessels. Of course, they first start, I'll go to the process briefly, because as I said, it's published. So they had to find appropriate clay source. This one was the nearest and most accessible. That was why it was chosen for our reconstruction, and it's far from the best clay source in the village that they used to use. The transport is practically always on one's back, and you can see this improbable rucksacks they are using. They used to use practically for everything, for taking and carrying woods to carrying children. In this case, clay for making bread baking pans. They always do that in group. Start with cleaning of organic and non-organic impurities, and then start to treating the clay. In fact, they're calling the name of all the process and of making bread baking pans in Stara Planina mountain is treating of bread baking pans. So this is the most important part of the procedure. Women are organized in groups. They're doing everything in groups. Only the most skilled is shaping the pan. So you can see on these photos students of architecture. They have every summer workshops because the village Gostusha is under protection as part of the national patrimony. And the last day of their workshops is also workshops of making bread baking pans. So I would like to see in the future the students of archaeology, ethnology and anthropology, because I think that then they will understand ceramics much better. During the treating, the organic tempers are added, mostly organic tempers. Only in one case we find that they put salt instead of organic tempers in the clay. The shaping is like this. They don't use any mechanical device, not even tools. It's shaped only by hands. The next day, the pan is coated with the diluted cow dung to protect it from cracking during the process of drying. And the pans are not decorated. Something that should be named the decoration is actually the cross incised on the bottom of the vessel, which is local tradition, and it serves as a symbolic and protective rather than an aesthetic function. That cross protect the pan of cracking, also the bread that is baked in this pan, and through the bag, the family that eats it. The process of drying depends, it's lasts during several days or several months. It depends on the part of the year, of course, and the properties of the clay. And finally, we have that very specific way of firing. As I said, those are vessels that are not fired before use. Their first using is actually their firing. The one that you see here is not the one that they made during the reconstruction. You will see that one later, but the procedure is same, and they're always doing the same things when they want to bake bread. So the pan is preheated until it's turned upside down, and heated until it turns white inside. After that, it's removed from the fire and wiped with a clean rag. Then it's filled with kneaded dough, as you can see here. And the pan can be covered with a ceramic or metal lid or the leaves of eatable plants before being covered with embers. But in our case, in Gostusha village, they put the embers and the ashes directly on top of the dough without any covering. So you can imagine how skilled have to be one to have the result as you can see it on the right. So you can see now the one of the pans made during our reconstruction. On the left, you can see it unbaked and completely dried, and on the right you can see the same pan after first use. And this is how it was the preparation, the preheating of that one during the year later. So we did the reconstruction in 2011, and this is what happened in 2012. So you can see how it was during the preheating, it was burned from the outside. And that is more or less where I finished my research. The traces of use weren't the one of the goals of my research. And when Jasna asked me to participate in this conference, I was a little bit afraid. Could I answer this challenge? But luckily, we documented absolutely everything that happened during our research. We also visited museums in Eastern and Southern Serbia, which have in their collections bread baking pans. So this is what I find. On the left is the bread baking pan that we used in our researches. So you see it's the old one, the one that belongs to the women who helped us in this case study. And you can see that it's completely light, let's say white inside, and burned from the outside, and you saw because why it's happened. On the other side, you can see the one that we find in Vysočki Odorovci, which is another village in Stara Planina mountain, and it's a slightly different situation. It's burned from outside, but inside you can see the last light mark, I'll say, of a bread, the space that dough covered, and the burned part of the inside surface, which wasn't, at least I presume that's the reason, which not covered with the dough. The problem is that I cannot ask anybody about that, because this is from one private collection, not the house in which this bread baking pan was used. So we have the same pattern, obviously, in other places. This is a pan on the left, the pan from the National Museum in Leskovac collection, and we can see the same pattern. It's like the mark of the dough or the bread inside and the burned outside. And on the right, we can see one example of bread baking pans used for another purposes, obviously, with the traces completely different. This is the same, more or less, on the left from the National Museum Zaječar and the National Museum Vranje. So obviously there is a pattern, but I have no conclusion, because I have many questions that I don't have answers. So in this moment, this is for me a challenge to start or to continue the research and to continue the research of this particular topic. But I would like to say that I would be really glad to continue with the colleagues from other countries and other regions of the Balkan, even wider, because I think that we have many things in common, and we are not using enough ethnoarchaeology of Europe. I think that ethnoarchaeological researches in this field in Europe is quite underestimated, and Europe still has a lot to give to us in this field. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Biljana. Are there any questions, maybe? Okay, if not, we can move. Oh, okay, I see.
Yes,
hand, Alexander Palavestra.
Yes, can you hear me?
yes. Hello.
Well, perhaps this is a question more for general discussion, but since Biljana and her very interesting paper provoked me, I would like to ask a certain question regarding her pottery, the pottery that she studied, and the other pottery, and of course the general problem of use, alternation of traces of use in archaeological pottery. And that is, how does actually the use alternation reflects in archaeological record? Namely, does it appear now in archaeological documentations, in our forms, in our field diaries, in our typology, in our description of pottery, its facture, its color? One vessel can be dependent of how it is used, can be the same one, and we can describe it if it's brand new as pottery that is, I don't know, light brown with the coarse surface and so on and so on. And if it has been used for, I don't know, 3 or 4 years in a fire with grease and fats and so on, as a very fine black furnished pottery. So does this use alternation or traces of use analysis, that whole this whole symposium, very welcome and very good organized? I'm thankful to the organizers. Does it change our archaeological record or our archaeological documentation? That is my question to Biba, and perhaps for a general discussion as well.
Yes. Well, my answer is not yet, because we need more research. As I said, I think that research, ethnoarchaeological research in this field, in the field of ceramics, is quite underestimated. So, as I said, you saw that I showed some bread baking pans that obviously they are from different places, and they have the same pattern of use. But I have many questions and I don't have answers, because I don't know how they use them. Why it shows those light marks on the surface, on the bottom. I need to research it to see, to have answers for how long time they use it, why it shows. And it's something that, as I said, will be obviously a very important question in my research. But I also think that I should not be the only one in Serbia who is doing these researches. We need many more examples, as we need, when we do analysis, we cannot make conclusions with 1 or 2 of 5 shares of ceramic. We need much more examples to make some conclusions in the future. I don't know, did I answer the question, but I think, as I said also, I would like to see the students of archaeology in the workshops to feel the clay, to learn how ceramics is made, not only here, not only the handmade ceramics in Dostusha, but hand wheel making, for example, in Zlakusa. There is a lot of different opportunities for the student to learn the techniques, the ceramic technique, and to feel the clay. If you don't know how to make the ceramic vessels, how can you understand it? And it is very important. And when we're talking about the traces, Professor Skibo yesterday said something very important, that you cannot talk about the traces of use in the shirts. You have to have the whole vessel.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. And maybe this is a topic to continue in the general discussion, but there are several more questions for Biljana. First, I think that Claire Burke raised hand also, and Professor Palavestra also. So if you want to ask a question, you can. But while we see that, there a question from Agnes Kolat, who says that very similar use traces can be observed on the 16th to 17th century material in Hungary. Is there a different way to use baking pans that have a hole in the middle?
No, the baking pans that have it's only a practical reason. The baking pans that they have hole in the middle are easier to move from the fire.
If you want to ask a question, you can, but while
somebody wanted to ask something, or I don't know what happened.
I don't know. I think that somebody turned their mic on. Yes, Claire said that she was just clapping. We have a question from Michela Spataro, who asks, do you know why salt was added to the clay in one case study?
No, actually, I don't know. I asked, but they said, well, that's how we do that. That's how my mother did that. So they don't know. They don't have that answers. And I also didn't saw it because we talked to a lot of people, but we had the opportunity to see very few bread baking pans because it's abundant 30 or 40 years ago, and only in the villages that are let's say the less accessible without roads, etc., they preserve the bad baking pans. And as I said, only in one I find somebody who wanted to show us to document the way of making them.
Thank you. There is also a question from Rumiana Koleva. Did they heat the wide up to 70 centimeters pieces upside down? And that archaeological record about Podnica says the opposite.
Yeah, they always heat all the bad bread baking pans upside down on the fire.
Okay. Thank you very much. And now we have a last presentation by Goce Naumov, Darko Stojanovski, and Sofia Stefanovic, Vessels as Social Containers, the Relationship Between Food and Pottery in Macedonian Neolithic.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for the introduction and my compliments for the organizers of this astonishing conference and for their ability to keep us together for 2 days. I will present something that we did together with Darko and with Sofia. So I will start the sharing of screen now, and I hope it will work well. Okay. So let me know if something is not working well. Is it okay?
Yes.
Okay, so we can proceed now. I have something here. Okay. So we'll present some kind of indications for the possibility to understand pottery as a social feature, not only as a utilitarian element of the life of first farming community. We will try to put some basic information about how the food was used and the amount of knowledge we have about the food production and how it could be related to the pots. This is, as I said, a very elementary knowledge and is just in initial output of something that we started in these years. So that's why the results are modest in a way, but it is a direction that we can keep on in future and maybe provide much more information about the relationship between food and pottery. In that way, we hope that our presentation will be tasteful in the same way as the food that was cooked or stored in the pots that we are presenting on this conference. So food is social. So anyway, whatever is prepared or cooked was shared with others. In that way, whatever was used for preparation or storage or cooking of the food was also an agent of different relationships between individuals or between communities. So in that way, whatever was produced in these first farming societies, whatever was consumed was absolutely observed and considered by the several factors, several representatives of different communities. So in that way, the food was not only consumed, but was also a way of communicating with each other. So this makes pottery as a way, as an agent in these kind of relationships in consummation or preparation of food, because whatever was prepared was in a way public. If we consider these kind of buildings we discover Neolithic sites, and if we consider also the closeness of the buildings in Neolithic villages, so whatever was cooked was some kind of awareness among the other neighboring buildings, and no matter whether the consummation of food was communal or not, the awareness of preparation of food or storing of food was absolutely something that was important to people, and probably raised their interest. So in that way, the pottery is a major item that was intended, or it was produced in order to functions in a course of food preparation, storage, and displaying. So it was used, as said, as an agent in this kind of relationship between people and between their social statuses or social positions. When we talk about food containers, we have to consider two general, let's call them forms of material containers. One is a mobile, that are pottery and similar items, and another one is statics, which considers beans, granaries, something that has the same function as pottery, but it's not movable. It stays in the buildings, and that's why it has a different sociality in regard to pottery. But as we will see later, sometimes they share similarities in terms of social aspects they bear. So in order to understand pottery in Neolithic archaeology, we need to have some kind of food research, because the food explains what was placed or preserved in these pots. So at this point, I must say that food research in Macedonian archaeology is in its baby stages, because not so much of food research was done in the previous several decades. There was some initiative in 1970s to do a bit of analysis in this regard, and in the last years we are trying in our projects to contribute much more with food research in relationship with other perspective that we would like to bring in our attempt to understand the first farming societies in Neolithic. So I will start with archaeobotany. As you can see, there are only few sites that has this kind of research applied. You can see there are 4 sites so far. Some of them are studied in 70s, some of them are currently studied, like Vršnik, Amzabegovo, Vrbianska Čuka, and Veluška Tumba. So our focus will be on Vrbianska Čuka and Amzabegovo, that is Barutnica site, that provides much more of the food-oriented research at the moment. So in a sum, the archaeobotanic research gave results about the most common food that was consumed in the Neolithic societies, that is wheat, barley, and also lentils and peas, for as they contribute much more than other types of food in explored parts of the settlements. In terms of zooarchaeology, the situation is a bit better, although it's still modest. There are a few more sites that are studied in this way. And again, Namzovegovo and Vrbenska Čuka provide much more information, although such studies were done in Madžari, Govrlevo, Izvor, Optičari, and Mogila. So far, the research indicates that in most of the parts of Macedonia, the food that was mainly consumed and which was based on meat was coming from goat and pigs, and less on let's say cow or bulls and cattle. But in Pelagonia, the situation is different because majority of food was coming from cattle, and less it was based on pig and goat meat. So in order to understand the food, we have to also analyze the people that were consuming the food. So in this way, anthropological analysis is also in advance. And due to BERT project that is still on, we were able to do some kind of isotope analysis, which also provide information about the food practices or about some kind of health issues people had. So this is ongoing research, and I hope that soon will be published, and then it will also help us to understand the food practices that come as information directly from people that were consuming food. And also something that is quite recent is Darko research in relation on lipid analysis. So in Vrbenska Čuka, lipid analysis was done, so he will later present his results and show us how actually we can use such information in order to understand the food practices, but also the sociality of food. So in attempt to understand the food and its relationship to pottery, also pottery research was done, but as in many other Balkan countries, so the pottery research in Macedonia was mainly in the terms of cultural historic archaeology. So that's why the archaeologists were mainly studying typology, decoration, maybe function and production. But also there are several studies in these categories that are giving us some information about how the pots were produced, how the typology was related with some different issues, and not only with so-called cultural groups. Also, there were studies in decoration and its way of composing, and also there are some nice studies on function of pottery, which give us some initial understanding how some pots could be used. And these are the sites that are involved in more detailed study of pottery. And again, Vrbenska Čuka and Namzovegovo have at this moment the most advanced research that gives us some kind of understanding of typology, production, and some possibility of use. But I must say that sociological or other ways of analysis that were presented in this conference were not still applied, but there are ongoing projects, and some announced on the level of petrography and traceology. And they will be focused more on how the pots were used in Pelagonia and other parts of Macedonia as well. So this is just initial, let's say, overview of the typology of pottery and the outlook of pottery in Vrbenska Čuka. You can see pots for display, for cooking, for storing, also pots for transport. And also the research in Namzovegovo provides sort of topology of the pottery that was used in let's say early Neolithic and middle Neolithic Neolithic in this case, but also there is information about the pottery from later Neolithic. So these are more or less the basic types of pottery that was used in Neolithic villages, and as you can notice, they are mainly associated with basic activities related to pottery, like storage, transport, cooking, consumption, and serving or displaying. This is so far the easiest approach to understand the function of the pottery, but absolutely we lack and we need much more research focused on more detailed features of pottery in order to understand the function of pottery, but also the type of food that was prepared or stored in these vessels. On the other hand, we shouldn't disregard the static containers. These are so-called installation made of clay found in different buildings in the Balkans. And they are also important in order to understand the function of food and how it was prepared, and how the preparation and consummation or storage of food was important to first farming societies and how it's related to their social networks. So this is the map with some of the sites that are actually confirming this kind of granaries and beans, and also again Vrbenska Čuka and Amzabegovo will be in focus. So these are some of the so-called installations from Vrbenska Čuka. The one above is a granary, is actually a complex of a granary and beans. Some of them were destroyed because the site was destroyed by bulldozers in 1970s. So that's why some architectural elements are not well preserved, but this complex granary had attached probably 8 bins next to it, which were probably used for processing of cereals, which were most likely preserved or stored in this granary. And we have to consider the outlook of the granary, which has the similar elements like these so-called clay tablets or altars. So these zigzag lines were present on the walls of this granary, which means that it was in a way symbolically protected, or whatever was inside was symbolically protected in order to have endurance. So we see such complexes divided or attached to each other in different parts in Vrbenska Čuka, and these are the buildings we discovered so far in these several years of excavations. And you can see the building number 2 in the red color. It has 12 such installations, which means that maybe it was functioning as a workshop or maybe as a bigger building. It has 130 meters square, which means that many of these beans and granaries and ovens were intended to be used for food preparation and storing, but also cooking. The case in Amzabegovo is similar. Darko in his current research found such beans and granaries next to it, and also as in case with other sites, a number of grinding stones next to it, which means that such areas were used for processing of food and its preparation. So that's why this kind of let's call them static containers are important to be discovered and to be considered in our future research of food and pottery. So I will stop here, and now the beautiful voice of Darko will continue, and he will tell you a bit more about his analysis of lipids in pots from Vrbenska Čuka.
Okay, just I have to jump in for a second to remind you that you have only several more minutes, so please try to keep in time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Goce. Okay, now you can see me as well. I'm afraid the controls are in your hands, so you'll have to click for me and put on the next slides. So it's becoming, I have to warn you that my internet is very unstable. So if I get lost at some point, Gotze, you'll have to continue. It's becoming clear that pottery is central in food preparation and in human diet in general, especially in the Neolithic. It's actually a cause for sub-revolution in food production and how we prepare and consume food, but that's a story for a different occasion. So whether cooking is a big communal feast like the one you see from modern day Serbia, or a family size, household size everyday food preparation or individual portion preparation, there are always different sizes of pots involved in the food preparation. And during this process, especially during exposure to heat, molecules of the food that is being prepared are entering the food vessel, and this microscopic environment acts protectively for these molecules. And especially lipids, as very durable molecules, they stay protected for thousands of years in there, luckily for us. And we have them today to extract and analyze them. Lipids are lighter than usually than the rest of the content of the broth or soup. So from experimental work, we know that the highest concentration of lipid preserved in pottery vessels is in the upper portion of the vessel. That's why we target this part when we're selecting potsherds for analysis. And there are photos missing in this. Oh, there they are. A few quick words about the method itself. So a piece of pottery selected, pottery sample is cleaned from modern contamination, crushed, submitted to a chemical treatment, prepared for gas chromatography. And from there, what we look for is these two peaks that you see in the bottom left corner. This is the stearic and palmitic fatty acids, and those are the first biomarkers that give us a clue that there are contents of animal origin fats in the vessel. And from here, we continue with mass spectrometry or isotopic analysis for further analysis, which help us to distinguish between milk and meat fats on one side, and then in the case of meat to distinguish between ruminant and non-ruminant, which is most often pig on the other hand. As Gotze mentioned, in the frameworks of the Big Bird project led by Sofia Stefanovic, we did analysis of organic residue from 4 Neolithic sites from the Balkans, of which Macedonia participated only with Vrubjanska Čuka. 27 samples were submitted from Vrubjanska Čuka, of which 6 gave us positive results that contain ancient lipids. One of them, as you can see in the graphics, one of them contained milk, which is important for us and for the bird project in general. 3 were undoubtedly used for cooking meat, and 2 had a significant mixture of pork as well. We also detected traces of cereal cooking from 2 samples from the Vrubjanska Čuka site, and with this fatty profile, let's say, of Vrubjanska Čuka, this site fits well in the southern Balkan profile of sites, at least from the information we have so far from Greece and Turkey and some sites in Bulgaria, which means the population related more or relied more on meat in their subsistence. And even though they were dairying and producing dairy products, this seems to be less important than for north of the peninsula, for example, in the Serbian sites that we
Okay, I'm
studied
really
as well.
sorry, but I have to ask you to try to wrap up with the conclusion because we are out of time.
Okay, so Gotze, if you want to take over and finish the next slides.
Okay.
Thank you.
So the Darko research indicates how actually we can relate the food to pots, and how actually each part of the pot can give us information about the deposition and about the processing, consumption, and representation of whatever was stored in and prepared inside. So in this way, we can see that each part of production of the vessels, or any way of using the food, or processing and cooking the food, even cleaning of vessel, was communal, was visible and seen by the others. So that way, also the containers, the pottery and beans and granaries were visual. They were communicating among the people that were using such items. So in this way, they were also asserting the status and gave some kind of notion about the world in which people live. So we can see that even on the level of, no matter if it's a decorated pot or pot used for cooking, they were investing a lot of knowledge and a lot of skills, and in some way they were intending to have a nice looking pots, at least in some of the sites we presented. So that's why whatever was tasty inside of these pots was also intended to be good looking outside. So in these terms, that's why the pottery was quite social. And so in these terms, we are actually not so far from the current treatments of dishes that we use in everyday cooking and serving. Even when we consider the dishes for cooking, we can see how actually they social are. So I will just, as an ending example, give something that happened to me last week. I had guests, so I prepared some food, and some of I prepared lentils, and it was prepared in this so-called animal old dishes, which I like because they relate me to some let's say childhood days in socialistic period. And one of the guests reacts, "Oh, you have such old pot, old dish, and we have new inox dishes, and we prepare food in new dishes." So it means that even on the level of possessing just elementary dishes, people indicate the kind of status or the kind of perception of themselves throughout these elements. So that's why I would say that when we consider pottery, we also sometimes should see how we actually understand, how we use it, maybe in order to help ourselves to understand how maybe people in the past were using pottery and how they were consuming food. So presenting so much of dishes and pottery related to food, I'm sure many of us become hungry. So that's why I will end now and allow the organizers to have the concluding discussion, and later we will go on our ways to kitchens and consume the food in these nice looking dishes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Since we will be moving to the general discussion in 10 minutes time, I'm asking you if you have any questions for Gotze and his colleagues to ask them during the general discussion. Yeah, this pots with the dinner guests was really nice finish. I would like to thank the organizers once again, to thank all of you for your interesting presentations. Now we will have 10-minute break. After that, you go to the other link and log into the general discussion. So thank you very much, and see you all in 10 minutes.